Hold on a second. Windows is falling and Linux is rising. Linux Mint has just become #1 on Steam among all Linux distributions without anyone officially announcing it. We're unpacking the data from the Steam hardware survey for March 2026, and you'll see why these numbers are far more interesting than they seem at first glance. Stick with me until the end, because some simple math is about to completely reshuffle the Linux rankings on Steam. The Steam hardware survey is one of the largest technical surveys among PC users in the world. Valve Corporation collects data every month from millions of active users, hardware, software, operating systems, and publishes the results transparently. In March 2026, here's what the big picture looks like. Windows sits at 92.33%. It still dominates massively. No one is denying that. At first glance, it seems like nothing has changed, like Windows will remain on the throne forever. But the number that truly matters isn't 92.33%, it's what comes after it, minus 4.28% compared to the previous month. That's almost 4.5 percentage points lost in a single month. For an operating system that has controlled PC gaming for decades, this is not a normal fluctuation. This is a seismic shift, and it deserves our full attention. macOS stands at 2.35%, with a growth of 1.19%. Apple is gaining ground on Steam, helped by the M-series chips that have turned Macs into machines capable of running games at decent performance. Linux reaches 5.33%, with a growth of 3.1%. The operating system everyone used to say wasn't for gaming, that it had no games, that it was too complicated for the average user, that it wasn't worth the effort, is now used by more than twice as many Steam gamers as macOS. This is the reality of March 2026, a reality backed by public data, minus 4.28% for Windows in a single month. Where is this drop coming from? There isn't a single answer, but rather a combination of factors acting at the same time and amplifying each other. The first factor is the Steam Deck. Every Steam Deck sold is a Steam user running Steam OS. That is, Linux, not Windows. The Steam Deck isn't a niche product for tech enthusiasts. It's a mainstream gaming device sold in millions of units, used by people who may have never even heard of Linux and don't care that they're running it. They just want to play games. The Steam Deck delivers exactly that, running Linux, friction-free. As Valve Corporation continues to sell more units and expand the ecosystem, every new sale means one less Windows user and one more Linux user in the stats. The second factor is Microsoft's policies and the ongoing Windows 11 drama. The strict hardware requirements for Windows 11, TPM2, Secure Boot, relatively recent CPUs, have effectively left millions of users stuck on Windows 10, which has entered end of life. These users are now facing an uncomfortable choice: buy new hardware just to run Windows 11, pay for extended support, or look for an alternative. And more are choosing the alternative. They install Linux, discover that the interface is no longer stuck in 2005, that software works, that their favorite games run through Proton, and they stay. They don't go back. The third factor, and perhaps the most powerful in the long term, is the maturation of Proton. Proton is the compatibility layer developed by Valve that allows Windows games to run on Linux. When it first launched, it was an interesting but imperfect experiment. Games sometimes worked, sometimes crashed, had graphical glitches, and performance was lower. Today, Proton is a mature, stable solution tested across thousands of titles. You can take a Windows game from Steam, launch it on Linux through Proton, and in the vast majority of cases, it just works. People no longer have a solid reason to stay on Windows just for gaming. 92.33% still looks like a colossal number, and it is. But a 4.28% drop in a single month, if repeated, or even sustained at half that rate, would radically reshape the landscape within just a few months. No one is saying Windows will disappear from gaming anytime soon. That would be absurd. But for the first time in history, its absolute dominance is being seriously questioned, consistently, and backed by real data. Linux is now at 5.33%, up by 3.1%. Linux has surpassed macOS on Steam, not by a little, by double. And it grew by 3.1% in a single month, exactly the month when Windows lost 4.28%. The correlation is too obvious to ignore. A significant portion of users leaving Windows moved directly to Linux. This growth didn't happen overnight, and it's no accident. It's the result of years of accumulated investment finally reaching maturity at the same time. Valve Corporation invested hundreds of millions in Proton, in SteamOS, in Linux compatibility. The open source community has worked tirelessly on GPU drivers and kernel optimizations. AMD delivered excellent open source drivers integrated directly into the kernel. NVIDIA finally released decent open source drivers for its recent series. Linux distributions have become more user-friendly, more stable, and less intimidating for users coming from Windows. Because within that 5.33%, there's fierce competition among Linux distributions. In fact, if you read the ranking without doing a few simple calculations, you'll come to a completely wrong conclusion. If you look at the list of Linux versions, the top spot is held by Arch Linux with 0.34%. Arch number 1, case closed, see you next time. But I don't stop at the first number, because the top number in the ranking is misleading, and here's why. Here's the fundamental problem with how the Steam survey presents Linux data. Distributions aren't grouped by name, they're fragmented across individual versions and treated as completely separate entities in the ranking. This means that if a popular distribution has multiple versions in use at the same time, its percentage is split across the ranking, scattered far apart. If you don't take the effort to add them up, you miss the full picture. Let's do the math Steam doesn't do for you, step by step. Linux Mint 22.3 sits in second place among Linux distributions at 0.27%. It grew by 0.13% compared to the previous month, a remarkable increase, considering normal month-to-month changes are just 0.01 to 0.02 percentage points. Linux Mint 22.3 is the latest stable release of the distribution, launched relatively recently, and its adoption is accelerating. Linux Mint 22.2 sits in fourth place in the same ranking at 0.07% and grew by 0.02%. This is the previous version, which users will gradually abandon in favour of 22.3 inches the coming months, a natural upgrade cycle we see with any distribution that has regular releases. Now let's do the simple addition. 0.27% plus 0.07% equals 0.34%. Exactly the same as Arch Linux. Arch Linux appears in first place in the ranking with 0.34%, while Linux Mint is fragmented across second and fourth place, but their combined share is identical. If Steam grouped distributions by name instead of splitting by version, Linux Mint and Arch Linux would be tied for first place. Versions 22.3 and 22.2 aren't the only Linux Mint releases in the survey. Users are also running versions 21.1, 21.2, and 21.3. The 21 series is a very popular long-term support release, with support lasting until 2027, and some users haven't upgraded to the 22 series yet. These users exist and contribute to the total number of Linux Mint users, even if their individual percentages are small enough not to appear prominently in the main list. If you add up all Linux Mint versions present in the survey, 22.3, 22.2, and all the active versions from the 21 series, Linux Mint becomes, without a doubt, the #1 distribution on Steam in March 2026. Linux Mint is a distribution explicitly created from the ground up for people who want to move from Windows to Linux without headaches. Its default interface, Cinnamon, feels familiar to anyone who has used Windows. People migrating from Windows choose Linux Mint as their first distribution. They stick with Linux Mint because it works and is stable. This is the hidden information in the Steam hardware survey that almost no one extracts. But the numbers are there, publicly available, and the conclusion is clear. Linux Mint is #1. If the trend from March 2026 continues, Linux could surpass 7-8% of Steam users by the end of 2026, possibly even more if Windows losses remain at similar levels. What could further accelerate this growth? Compatibility with anti-cheat systems remains the biggest remaining hurdle. Popular competitive games don't work on Linux due to anti-cheat systems like Easy Anti-Cheat or BattleEye, which require kernel-level access in ways incompatible with Linux architecture. Valve and the community are working on solutions, and progress exists, but the problem isn't fully solved. If this barrier falls, the wave of new users will be significant. GPU drivers continue to improve. AMD is already in excellent shape with open source drivers integrated into the kernel. NVIDIA has made important strides with open source drivers for its recent series. As hardware support becomes more robust and consistent, the experience for new Linux users improves and retention rates increase. Linux Mint continues to mature and attract new users, making the transition from Windows as smooth as possible. The results are already visible in the statistics. Windows hegemony is being eroded, month by month, by a combination of factors that Microsoft cannot fully control. Proton will continue to improve. The Steam Deck will continue to sell. Linux Mint is steadily gaining new users seeking an alternative, and quietly, without any official announcements, remains the #1 Linux distribution on Steam as the preferred choice for gaming. Linux Mint is quietly taking the lead among Linux distributions on Steam. Its growth is driven by several factors: Steam Deck users running Linux out of the box, Proton allowing thousands of Windows games to run seamlessly, and Linux Mint's user-friendly interface that makes the switch from Windows smooth and hassle-free. Windows may still dominate overall, but month by month, its share is shrinking, while Linux continues to grow steadily. Linux Mint will remain the top choice for gamers looking for a stable, reliable alternative. Thanks for watching. If you found this video useful, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. See you in the next video.